Hello, and thank you for watching our presentation, At What Cost Are We Protecting Corporate America? I am Nadine, and this presentation was put together by myself, Francesca Ragusa, and Kelly Kissler. All three of us are Masters of Public Health students at Purdue University. In this presentation, we will discuss a couple different water crises in American towns. We will start with the poisoning of Tom River, New Jersey's drinking water and how that eventually led to a cancer cluster in the town. You can see in the image on the right the chemical dumping site and how close that was to many sources of drinking water and local wells. Then we will discuss a more recent chemical spill in Elk River, which is in Charleston, West Virginia, also known as Chemical Valley. In short, we argue that the government and government agencies in America consistently fail to protect the health of humans in favor of protecting economic growth for their own town, state, or country. Let's start with Tom River, New Jersey's story. Toms River, New Jersey is a town with a population of about 88,000. The town's largest industry in the 50s was chicken farming. In 1952, a company called Ciba-Geigy set up shop in Toms River. The company manufactured dyes, pigments, resins, and epoxy additives. In the 1950s, there were not a lot of environmental laws, and the company was legally dumping 5 million gallons of environmental waste directly into Toms River. In general, the community was excited about the opportunity and the economic growth that Ciba-Geigy offered the locals, and no one really questioned the safety of the dye manufacturing plant. The government advertised the company as a good neighbor, and those moving in and living in the area never thought to question it. In 1971, a man was paid to dispose of another non-New Jersey company, Union Carbide's chemical waste. There were local chicken farmers in Toms River that allowed this man to bury the chemicals on their property, where the chemicals poisoned the soil and then seeped into the ground. After there were 60 confirmed cases of childhood cancer, also known as a confirmed cluster of childhood cancer, an epidemiological investigation was launched. The investigation discovered TCE, a known cancer-causing chemical, and the water company began filtering out the chemicals from the water. When the cancer cluster continued to grow, the water was tested for more chemicals, which is when they found there were more cancer-causing chemicals in the drinking water and began using another method to treat the water. Upon further investigation, this is the list of poisonous chemicals found in the drinking water in Toms River, New Jersey. And only TCE was found and treated for at the initial investigation, which tested for only the 76 chemicals on the EPA's priority pollutant list. There were a lot of other things in the water that were not on the list that were also known and suspected cancer-causing chemicals. These chemicals found their way into the human body of Toms River locals in a variety of ways. The town was distributing poisonous water to all the townspeople, and they were ingesting or drinking the water as well as using the water to shower, wash their clothes, prepare their meals, and water their gardens. People were also exposed to the chemicals through direct contact with the river during activities like swimming or fishing. And lastly, the chemicals could seep into the ground, the way the image on the right is demonstrating with the chemical TCE. This chemical is released into the air and the ground through spills, which seep into the ground and contaminate the groundwater, which is eventually fed back to the public through our faucets. Rains and high winds also spread the surface level chemicals around the area, contaminating more soil, food, and air. TCE and PERC and mercury all impacted the body the most when they were ingested. Benzene, on the other hand, affected the body when people inhaled the chemical. Finally, chloroform and lead had the biggest effect on the body when they were both ingested and inhaled. The biggest health effects after long-term exposure to any or all of these chemicals at high levels are cancer or liver and nervous system damage. Next, we will discuss the 2014 chemical spill in Charleston, West Virginia, a place that has been dubbed Chemical Valley because of its booming chemical and coal industries that keep the city economically alive. Charleston has a population of about 300,000 people, and Freedom Industries was a company that bought, sold, and mixed chemicals and was located less than a mile upstream from American Waters, the local water company. Freedom Industries had not been inspected since 1991, and 23 years later, the tanks that were housing the chemical waste were in rough shape. One began leaking, and the chemicals flowed into the Elk River. The chemicals made the water smell like licorice and begged questions from the public about the safety of their drinking water. After a few days, Freedom Industries, the water company, and the government said that the water was safe to drink, despite the strong licorice scent still lingering in the water. They then said that pregnant women should not drink the water because there was limited amount of data available about the effect of the chemicals on humans. Eventually, 93 days after the leak, the smell went away and the water was cleared by a non-biased source as being chemical-free. However, the event sparked a distrust between the community and their government because they insisted that the water was safe while the brown, smelly water pictured on the right was coming out of their faucets. The story of Charleston, West Virginia makes us wonder, what would their story be if the chemical that leaked did not have an odor? The poisonous water of Tom's River led to serious illness and death after years of consumption because the public simply could not know that the chemicals were in the water. Luckily, MCHM, one of the chemicals found in the Elk River in Charleston, that we will get into in the next couple slides, had a distinct smell that forced the public to ask questions and discover answers that they were not even looking for. The two chemicals found in the drinking water in Charleston, West Virginia were MCHM and PPH. MCHM was the smelly chemical that experts could identify soon after the leak was discovered. Little was known about the chemical itself and the effect it would have on the people of Charleston. 12 days after the incident, experts also discovered another chemical that contaminated the water, PPH. PPH was thought to make up 5 to 7.3% of the chemical mixture that entered the river in 2014. But the toxicity of PPH is lower than that of MCHM. Similar to the water contamination event in Tom's River, the sources of exposure to the chemicals was through the water. At first, people were told not to drink, bathe, cook, or even wash their clothes with the tap water. Any contact with the water was discouraged. The surrounding soil was also contaminated as the chemical leak was going directly into the surrounding soil. The public were exposed to the chemicals through ingestion, drinking or cooking with the water, inhalation, as in breathing chemicals from the water, and the fact that everyone in the town could smell the chemicals in the water exemplifies how they were being exposed to the chemicals via inhalation. And then finally through skin contact. The skin contact is also a viable mode of entry of the chemicals into the human body. For example, if someone were showering or even washing their hands with the contaminated water. There's very little data or research done on the major health effects that exposure to MCHM or PPH could lead to. Based on what happened in Charleston, it is believed that the chemicals can cause flu-like symptoms, vomiting, rashes, asthma attacks, and respiratory issues. There was no research done on the effect of these chemicals on humans, but the West Virginia state government asked the CDC about the toxicity and health effects of the chemicals, and they ran tests on rats. They found that high levels of PPH led to eye irritation, and high levels of PPH or MCHM led to blood in the urine of rats, liver, kidney, and red blood cell damage. The image on the right shows how highly concentrated the levels of MCHM were in the water on day 1 of the leak and after 10,000 gallons were put into the river, and how day by day the chemicals were diluted downstream. The people most susceptible to the ill effects of MCHM and PPH are children, because their immune system are underdeveloped. Pregnant women, because so many of the body's resources are fueling the growth of the child rather than fighting off infection, and elderly people, because their aging bodies have weaker immune systems. And finally, those with compromised immune systems for other reasons are also more susceptible to illness from contamination. In Toms River, we see evidence of that when there is a confirmed cluster of specifically childhood cancers after years of drinking the water. In the womb, many fetuses were exposed to the chemicals before birth through the mother drinking and bathing in the contaminated water. After the child is born, their developed immune systems simply cannot fight the ill effects of the chemicals as they continue drinking and bathing in the water. In Charleston, 671 people reported to poison control symptoms of dizziness, vomiting, nausea, headaches, asthma attacks, respiratory issues, reddening skin, itching, and rash. While many of these symptoms occurred in children, there were adults and people of all ages affected by these symptoms. Toms River contamination took years to see an effect, but in Charleston, 671 people had called poison control within 36 hours of the leak. After years of dumping their chemical waste directly into Toms River, Ciba-Geigy built a 10-mile pipe that directly led to the ocean. While this is not exactly proper toxic waste disposal practices, since the chemicals were contaminating local beaches and the environmental impact this would have on ocean life, it did put some distance between the townspeople and the chemicals. Ciba-Geigy was also contributing to the economic growth in the town. A large company like Ciba-Geigy meant good jobs, which also contributed to the growth of the small town. More and more people were moving into Toms River and building houses close to the factory, and all these newcomers were told Ciba-Geigy was a good neighbor. Unfortunately, Ciba-Geigy also hid information about their waste disposal methods, including the fact that they were dumping 5 million gallons of waste into Toms River each day, and the 10-mile pipe to the ocean that they had built. They did not disclose information on the toxicity of the chemicals they were using either. In 1984, the pipe burst and the smelly, thick sludge came out, and the New Yorker reports that Ciba-Geigy officially said that the wastewater was 99% water and a little salt. From the smell alone, this was a lie. Then we can look at the reaction of Freedom Industries. The company was an economic asset to the city. Charleston was a city rooted in the chemical and coal industry, and Freedom Industries contributed to the economic growth of the city. The locals are given jobs that they rely on to feed and shelter their families, and they were in a tight spot to be questioning the effect that the company's work had on the community. Unfortunately, the company destroyed the availability of clean water to the city of Charleston, West Virginia. They lied to the community about the safety of their water, even when they knew there were contaminants present. And when the leak became clear, they claimed they did not know about it. They did not report the leak reaching the river, and they claimed to have not known how much of the chemical mixture was leaked. The company was not keeping up with regulations and had not been inspected since 1991. Rather than assuming responsibility, the company left the site and abandoned the town. Another corporation involved in both of these cases was the water companies. In Toms River, the water company was the Toms River Water Company. They supplied drinking and household water to the entire Toms River Township, with water that they got 2 miles downstream of Ciba-Geigy. In 1965, 13 years after Sibagagi moved into the town, there were signs of water contamination. However, it was a hot, dry summer, and the demand for water was high. Toms River Water Company continued to supply water they knew was contaminated to the people of Toms River. In fact, they worked with Sibagagi to conceal the water pollution from the public. When the water was tested for chemical contamination, it was only tested for these 76 chemicals on the EPA priority list. When TCE was a confirmed contaminant, the water company treated the water for that chemical. For another decade, the other chemicals that were not on the EPA's list continued to contaminate the water. They were eventually discovered, and then the water was treated for those other chemicals, but not without the cost of more children with cancer. The water company in Charleston, West Virginia was American Water. They are the largest private water company in the country with 15 million customers. The Charleston plant services the largest area in the East Coast, but also supplies some of the most expensive water in the country. The company is located less than a mile downstream from Freedom Industries. After the Freedom Industries leak, American Water waited 6 hours to disclose the chemical contamination of the water. The smell of licorice begged many questions and demanded answers from the public. So American Water was not able to conceal the leak if they had wanted to. They disclosed that the water was contaminated with MCHM and then later disclosed that PPH was also contaminating the water. The water company did not describe how often they were testing or treating the water, but after a few days, the water still smelled of licorice. They confirmed that the water was safe to drink and that the chemical levels were too low to cause any ill health effects. Now we will discuss the community reaction in both cities. In Toms River, the community started to put the pieces together decades after the company moved to the area. Parents of sick children reached out to local health departments to no avail about the high rate of childhood cancer, and they essentially launched the community's fight for clean water. Contrary to the slower reaction of the Toms River community, Charleston could smell the contamination, and many could see it in the color of the water coming out of their faucets. The community demanded answers within hours of the leak. Community members called the health department, government officials, the water company, and Freedom Industries. They mobilized quickly and even sparked policy change, which we will get into in the next slide. After both incidents, many locals suffered the loss of jobs, and there was economic suffering in both towns after the plants shut down. Once the community became aware of the problems with their water, they chose to fight back, go public, demand answers, and reach out to the public officials to demand change. Now for the government reactions. Many individual parents and even rallied groups of parents reached out to the local health department and the state government as concerned citizens. For a long time, all health departments said that there was nothing to worry about. Eventually, though, the data was undeniable. There was a confirmed childhood cancer cluster in Toms River, New Jersey, and government officials launched an investigation. In 1995, the New Jersey Health Department, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, and the Citizens Action Committee on Childhood Cancer Clusters were working together to find a reason to explain the cancer cluster in New Jersey. The organizations created programs to identify cancer clusters and to halt the spread of cancer as soon as possible. The cons of the way the government reacted to the issues in Toms River is that they reacted late. They did not research the effects a chemical company might have on drinking water before Sibagagi set up camp. When they began looking into water contamination, they only tested the water for the standard 76 chemicals on the EPA's priority pollutant list, which did not shrink the cluster and led to further investigation of the town's water. In Charleston, West Virginia, We will start with some of the positive things that came out of the event. It brought the relaxed approach to environmental inspections to light and brought public awareness to the fact that there were no regulations surrounding the upkeep of tanks containing hazardous waste. So even if the tanks were being properly inspected, there were no policies in place to fix those tanks. This event sparked the West Virginia Tank Bill, which was passed 59 days after the leak in Charleston. The local government, particularly the head of the local health department, Kanawha Charleston Health Department, was very honest with the public about how little data was available about the chemicals that were in their water. Dr. Gupta, the head of the department, publicly questioned the safety of the water after the state and federal government deemed the water safe to drink. He made it public knowledge that these chemicals had never been tested on humans and that there was no research to back up the fact that they were safe to drink. Unfortunately, other government officials and government agencies were dishonest about the validity of the data they were using to deem the water safe. In fact, the CDC deemed the water safe based on the amount of MCHM it took to kill a rat. Rather than testing for illness or negative health effects, they based the safety levels of MCHM on the death of a rat. After calling the water safe for 33 days, the CDC actually visited Charleston, West Virginia, and could not say that the water was safe to drink, and that there had been extremely limited research done on the chemical. None of the research that had been done on this chemical was done on humans. And this came out over a month after the leak. The Department of Environmental Protection, the DEP, was the state's health department in West Virginia. The department loosened regulations around chemical waste and turned a blind eye to complaints of dirty streams and pollution waivers. The governor of West Virginia, Joe Manchin, changed the slogan of the state to "Open for Business," and then appointed Randy Huffman as the head of the DEP. Randy Huffman and the DEP went as far as suing the EPA for hindering business initiatives. Upon further research, Freedom Industries had 25,000 violations of the Clean Water Act that the DEP knew about and never initiated a single fine for. Similar to Tom's River, the water was only tested for the standard 76 chemicals on the EPA's priority pollutant list. There is no easy way to test water for a large number of chemicals, so drinking water pollutants continue to be missed through these poor testing methods today. After incidents like these two, cleanup needs to be discussed. Tom's River sealed off the contaminated wells and lakes and treated the contaminated water. Once they knew the contaminants in the water, they were able to create a water treatment method to eliminate the cancer-causing chemicals in the water, bringing them back up to drinking standards. Ciba-Geigy agreed to a Superfund site cleanup and annual testing and an inspection of chemicals. The cleanup efforts are estimated to cost about $90 million. As far as cleanup efforts go in Charleston, by day 20, the water was deemed safe. No specific cleanup methods were referenced, and there were no water treatments or actions made to clean the water. 20 days after the spill, Freedom Industries was ordered to remove the tanks, and no other tank farms would be permitted to operate on the site. Within the first year of the tank bill passing, there were 1,100 tanks in West Virginia that were in such bad shape they needed to be decommissioned. It was not even possible to fix them. By day 93, the water no longer smelled, and Dr. Andy Welton, a Purdue University professor at the time, deemed the water free of MCHM and PPH. He is a water scientist that came to the city as an unbiased scientist doing research into what was going on in Charleston. Actions that could have been taken in Toms River that would have prevented the childhood cancer cluster are listed on the left. The city and/or the water company should have done more research into where Ciba-Geigy came from and what kind of environmental footprint they left in that town and why they were leaving that town. In addition to that research, or even without that research, it would have been essential to the Toms River community if the government, whose role it is to protect public health, learned about what kind of chemicals the company put out and what human exposure to those chemicals meant. The government should have learned about the company's waste removal efforts and worked with Ciba-Geigy to ensure public and environmental safety. The issue falls on the fact that it was up to the community members to ask these questions, and a great deal of the info was being purposefully concealed from them. At the time that Ciba-Geigy moved into Toms River, there were very few environmental laws, and what has happened in Toms River has contributed to the many new regulations around chemical waste. The laws in place now are designed to prevent cancer clusters and the loss of life that incidents like what happened in Toms River turned into. The leak in Charleston happened after there was a bigger focus on environmental health. Many policies were in place to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, but there was little done to enforce the rules and regulations. The tank bill has been passed now, which is designed to keep tanks and chemical storage units safe, and this is a preventive method. But other rules and regulations were not being kept up. The final preventive action that could have kept this thing from happening would be rules and regulations around chemical companies working so close to bodies of water, and especially bodies of water that feed drinking and household water supplies. There should also be policies around chemical companies working so closely to water companies. In both Toms River and in Charleston, the chemical companies were less than 2 miles from the water companies. To prevent issues like this from occurring in the future, the government will have to partner with corporations and the community. The government will have to prioritize public health and safety over economic growth and money. They will need to create and enforce regulations to support human health. These days, many corporations have a dedicated program to environmental initiatives. Larger companies, especially chemical companies, should be required to have a team of people working for sustainability and ensuring that the state and federal environmental regulations are followed. In these examples, both the chemical companies and the companies are run like businesses with little to no concern for human health. This should change with a partnership and consistent communication between corporations, government, and the community. Community action around preventing this kind of water contamination would revolve around education and awareness. If there were programs in place to educate people about how to look at water reports and where to go for a better understanding of what goes into our household's water, then the community could trust the government with their health. Educating the public about water quality and the dangers of water contamination would build trust among the public and their surroundings, but it would also hold corporations and government to a higher standard. Corporations like Tom's River Water Company or American Water or Ciba-Geigy or Union Carbide or even Freedom Industries all have a bottom line. These are companies that are looking to build revenue and make a profit. Their end goal is to make money. On the other hand, government's end goal is to establish justice and promote welfare. The government's main role is to protect people. While economics is a part of that, if people do not have their health, then they have nothing. The government should be protecting the health of its people first and foremost. Ciba-Geigy began poisoning Tom's River in 1952, nearly 70 years ago today. What happened in Charleston, West Virginia happened only 5 years ago. This was history repeating itself. When history repeats itself with a different company, then the common factor is not the company at all, and the blame cannot fall on the company alone. The companies will protect their bottom line and their corporate interests because that's what companies and corporations do. The government has not changed in the last 70 years. Company after company is poisoning local water supplies, and the government remains our constant. It falls on the government to protect the community and public health. In each of these examples, we see local, state, and federal government failing to protect human health in favor of economic growth and promoting the welfare of businesses over humans. Thank you so much for tuning into our presentation. The following slides are the references used to create this slideshow. Thanks so much for tuning in.